Diana returned Charles's birthday gift in front of Camilla. Nobody expected that there was a box on the bed, wrapped in the wrapping paper used by luxury jewelry stores, that cream color that needs no embellishment because the engraved name on the lid already says everything that needs to be said. Diana found it in Charles's room on November 14, 1985, the day of the prince's birthday. She had gone to look for something, or perhaps she simply passed by there. The exact version of how she came to find the box varies depending on who tells the story. What does not vary is what she did next. She waited. She said nothing at that moment. She waited for the evening event, the private gathering Charles had organized for his birthday, where Camilla Parker Bowles would be present among the guests. And when the moment came for Charles to open the gifts, Diana took the box and placed it back on the table in front of him. Without a scene, without lofty words, just the gesture, the room fell silent. This is the story of that moment and everything that made it possible. The architecture of a lie. To understand why that gesture was so devastating, one must understand the world in which it occurred. The marriage between Charles and Diana had become, by 1985, a play with two actors who had forgotten that they ever believed in the script. They had been married for 4 years. They had 2 children, William, who was 3 years old, and Harry, who had been born in September of the previous year. From the outside, the image was perfect. The most photographed royal family in the world, the blonde princes, the heir to the throne in his prime years. Inside, the situation was different. Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles had resumed their relationship approximately in 1986, according to subsequent documentation, although Diana had her own suspicions much earlier. The suspicions were not paranoia. They were the result of years of careful observation by a woman who, despite the fragile image the press constructed of her, had an extraordinary emotional intelligence and a perfect memory for the details that others preferred to ignore. What Diana had learned to do out of necessity was to read the subtext. The phone call Charles made when he thought she wasn't around, the change in his expression when mentioning certain names, the particular quality of his absences, and, eventually, the gifts. The gifts had their own language in this marriage, and Diana had learned to read it. What she found in the box, the exact contents of the box on Charles's bed, have been described in slightly different ways by various sources, but the core remains constant. There was jewelry, pieces of evident quality, chosen with the specific knowledge of someone's tastes. They were not the kind of generic gift a man gives to an acquaintance or an employee. They were the kind of gift that says, "I know you, I know what you like, I am thinking of you." What this meant for Diana did not require interpretation. It was the confirmation of something she had suspected, feared, and known at the same time, that particular state of knowledge that exists before we have the words or the evidence to name it correctly. It was not the first time she had stumbled upon evidence of this kind. Years earlier, when they were still dating, she had discovered that Charles was sending gifts to Camilla at strategic moments, symbolic farewells that, as Diana would discover, were never really farewells. But this was different. It was her husband's birthday. It was her own home. It was a box that someone had bought, wrapped, and placed on a bed that Diana knew well. The question was what to do with that knowledge, and Diana decided to do something that nobody expected, to use it. The birthday party, Charles's birthdays, were institutional events as much as personal ones. November 14th required a certain presence, selected guests, the right level of formality. Camilla Parker Bowles was part of that circle, wife of Andrew Parker Bowles, longtime friend of the prince, a presence that no one in Charles's inner circle questioned because no one had an incentive to question it, or because everyone knew the truth and had agreed not to speak it out loud. Diana arrived at the party having already made her decision. This is the part that people tend to underestimate when hearing the story. The act of returning the gift in front of Camilla was not an impulse. It was not an uncontrolled emotional reaction of a hurt woman who lost her composure at the worst possible moment. It was a calculated decision, made with the coldness of someone who has processed the pain and has decided that the pain deserves a visible response. Diana was, when she wanted to be, a strategist. The room was full when the time for gifts arrived. The guests, that circle of aristocrats and friends of Charles that Diana always described as a world completely foreign to her own, were present. Camilla was among them. Charles began to open the packages. The social process of gifts in that context has its own choreography. The gesture of gratitude, the appropriate comment, the circulation of the object among those present who show interest. Charles reached the box, and Diana intervened. She took the box, she looked at it, she placed it back on the table in front of Charles with a precision that was in itself a message. She said nothing that history has preserved exactly. What history did preserve is the silence that followed. The silence that said it all. There are silences that are the absence of noise, and there are silences that are the presence of something too big to fit into words. The one that filled that room on Charles's birthday was of the second type. Those present understood what had just happened, even if they could not have articulated it in precise terms if asked to do so at that moment. They understood because Diana's gesture required no explanation. It was self-explanatory in the way that acts that speak the truth in situations where everyone has been pretending the truth does not exist are self-explanatory. Charles understood, Camilla understood, and everyone in the room understood that something had changed, that Diana had crossed an invisible line separating the wife who endures in silence from the woman who decides that silence no longer serves her. What did Charles do? The sources are vague on the specific details of the immediate reaction, which is itself a significant detail. When someone does something that leaves you without an appropriate response, history tends not to preserve the response because there wasn't one. And Camilla? Witness descriptions speak of the specific quality of immobility of someone who has been included in a conversation they didn't expect to happen. The party continued because parties in that world always continued, but something had been said that could not be unsaid. Why this moment matters, the return of the gift is remembered because it was, in terms of communication, perfect. Diana did not accuse Charles of anything that could be denied. There were no words that could be misinterpreted, taken out of context, or used against her. There were no tears that could be presented as emotional instability, something the royal system had attempted to do with her on multiple occasions. There was no confrontation that could be described as a scandal on her part. There was only an object returned to its proper place. But that gesture contained a complete statement. It said, "I know who you are" to him. It said, "I know what this gift is." It said, "I am not going to pretend I don't know." It said, above all, "You are not invisible to me, even if you have spent years being so." Diana had learned, through years of marriage to an institution that valued appearance over truth, that appearance could be used as a weapon. The royal system required her to maintain her composure, to smile, to represent the image. That system assumed she would play by its rules. What she discovered on that birthday is that the rules could be used in the opposite direction, that it was possible to return a gift in front of witnesses and speak a devastating truth without violating any code of conduct that could be used against her. It was, in terms of palace strategy, brilliant. The pattern of gifts, the 1985 birthday incident, did not occur in a vacuum. It forms part of a pattern that Diana documented in her conversations with Andrew Morton, and that has been preserved in multiple authorized biographies and testimonies of people close to her. Gifts had been a private language between Charles and Camilla since before Charles's marriage to Diana. The bracelet with the letters G and F, the initials for Gladys and Fred, the private nicknames they shared, taken from a radio show Charles adored, had been sent before the royal wedding, during the days when the relationship was supposed to have ended. Diana found that bracelet. She confronted Charles. Charles explained it as a farewell gesture. The farewell was not a farewell. By 1985, 4 years after the wedding and 2 after William's birth, Diana had accumulated enough evidence to understand that the bracelet had never been a closure, but a continuation mark. The birthday gift was, in that context, not a surprise, but a confirmation of what she already knew and what the royal system continued to pretend did not exist. The difference between 1981 and 1985 is that Diana had learned what she was capable of doing with that knowledge. The Diana the palace didn't expect. There is a version of Diana that the royal system believed they were managing for years, the silly girl, as the Queen Mother described her according to sources Morton documented. Young, unstable, vulnerable. Someone who could be accommodated within institutional requirements through a combination of patience and pressure. That version of Diana was not the real Diana. The real Diana was a woman who had processed a difficult childhood, the abandonment of her mother, the coldness of a father who did not know how to comfort her, the boarding schools, and had developed, precisely from processing that, an extraordinary capacity to read situations and people. was empathetic in the deepest and also the most strategic sense of the word. She understood what people felt because she had paid attention in a way that most didn't bother to do. She had also learned to survive. And surviving in the palace environment meant understanding its rules better than those who had created them, so she could use them to her advantage when necessary. The gesture of returning the gift is an example of this capability. It is an act that no one could criticize directly without revealing why they knew it was inappropriate. It is a message that only those who knew the truth could fully understand, which meant that the only offended parties were the guilty ones. Diana, at 24, had learned to move pieces on a chessboard that had been handed to her without explaining the rules. Camilla and the weight of presence to understand the moment completely. One must think about what it meant for Camilla Parker Bowles to be in that room when it happened. Camilla had existed for years in Charles's life as a presence that everyone knew and no one named. She was the friend. She was the wife of a friend. She was part of the circle. The structure of collective denial surrounding her was solid precisely because everyone who maintained it had reasons to maintain it. Diana's gesture pulled her out of that structure of denial and placed her, for a moment, in a space where the real situation was visible. It was not a direct insult. It was not a verbal accusation. It was something more efficient. It was the acknowledgement of her presence in the situation in a way that collective denial had been systematically avoiding. Diana said, without words, by returning that gift, "I know exactly who this was for." It was an act of naming what everyone pretended not to see. Biographers who have written about Camilla in depth, including Penny Junor, whose work is generally favourable to Charles and Camilla, have documented that the relationship between Camilla and Diana was one of carefully managed tension on both sides. The tension of two women who know exactly what the other represents and who have agreed, for opposite reasons, not to say it directly. The birthday broke that tacit agreement, and it broke it in a way that came from Diana, which meant that the break was on her terms. What happened next? The marriage between Charles and Diana continued for 11 years after the birthday of 1985. This is the part of the story that people sometimes forget when talking about the incident as if it had been the definitive breaking point. It was not. Things in royal marriages do not end in a single dramatic moment. They end in the accumulation of many dramatic moments and many quiet ones, in the erosion over years, in failed negotiations and attempts at therapy, and conversations that arrive too late to repair what is already broken. But the gesture of returning the gift was something specific in that accumulation. It was the moment Diana stopped pretending she didn't know what she knew. It was the moment the balance of public denial shifted, where Diana went from being the party who endures to the party who names. After that point, the dynamics between the three of them were different, even if the difference was not always visible from the outside. Charles knew Diana had crossed a line. Camilla knew she had been seen directly. And Diana knew, for the first time with clarity, that she could use the truth in a way that the system could not completely silence. That knowledge would accompany her in everything that came next. The interview with Morton, the Panorama interview, the years of activism that transformed her image from royal wife to global figure. Diana had discovered in that room that she had a voice that worked even in the spaces where she was supposed to keep silent. There is a final irony in this story that deserves to be named. Diana went to her husband's birthday room. There was a gift on the table. She took that gift and returned it. But the most significant gift that night was not the one Charles had prepared for Camilla. It was what Diana gave herself by returning the box. Because what Diana reclaimed in that gesture was not just the dignity of not pretending she didn't know what she knew. It was something more fundamental. The confirmation that her perception of reality was correct. That what she had seen, suspected and known for years was not the instability the palace attributed to her, but the precise reading of a situation that those around her preferred not to see. Returning that gift was saying to herself, "I trust what I see," and that trust, once established, cannot be taken away. The royal system spent years trying to make Diana doubt her own perception. Charles's birthday in 1985 was the moment that strategy definitively failed. Diana walked out of that room knowing something that none of those who tried to make her doubt could take from her, that she had seen the truth correctly, and that she had found a way to speak it in the only language that world understood. Not with words, with a gesture that nobody expected and nobody forgot.